The city of Hovendale had never seen a storm like this. The whispers that began as idle gossip now roared in the boardrooms and trading floors. Adrian Cross was losing his empire, and the woman dismantling it was his own wife. Clara stood at the center of it all, poised, elegant, every appearance a calculated strike. Her charity gala had crowned her in the public eye, her alliances with shareholders had given her weight, and her icy defiance in Adrian's presence had turned her into a symbol. She was no longer the placeholder bride, no longer the invisible wife. She was the queen rising from the ashes. But victory wasn't yet complete. Clara knew Adrian wasn't the type of man to fall quietly. His silence was deceptive, his fury dangerous, and his obsession with her, unpredictable. He had allowed cracks to show, allowed himself to be humiliated in public, yet he hadn't unleashed his full force. That meant he was waiting. For her. For the perfect moment. Clara prepared for the final strike. In a private meeting at Eleanor Grant's penthouse, she spread contracts and reports across a long glass table. Victor Lane, Thomas Grayson, and Eleanor herself leaned forward, listening as Clara outlined her plan. Tomorrow's board vote will decide the expansion project, she said calmly. If it passes, Adrian consolidates his power. If it fails, he bleeds. And with these documents, she tapped the folder Thomas had delivered weeks ago, we can make sure the board sees the truth. It's reckless. It's dangerous. And it will end him. Eleanor's lips curved into a thin smile. You've come farther than any of us thought possible, Clara. But are you ready to face him directly? Clara's gaze hardened. I've faced him every day for years. Tomorrow, I end it. That night, Clara stood before her hotel mirror, her reflection both familiar and foreign. She wore no gown, no jewelry, only a slip that revealed the scars of sleepless nights and the glow of transformation. She remembered the woman she used to be, the timid wife who waited by Adrian's bedside, the obedient bride her parents sold into a loveless marriage. That woman was gone. What remained was steel wrapped in silk, fire hidden behind calm eyes. But as she turned away from the mirror, she froze. Adrian was in the suite, seated in the dark, his presence filling the room like a predator in wait. Her pulse skipped, but she didn't flinch. Do you ever use a door like a normal man? She asked coldly. Adrian rose slowly, his black shirt unbuttoned at the collar, his gaze burning. Normal men don't want what I want, he rasped. He crossed the room in silence, stopping just inches away, his scent and heat overwhelming. Tomorrow, you think you'll destroy me. But tell me, Clara, when you take everything, will it be enough to silence what's between us? His hand lifted, brushing her cheek with surprising gentleness, though his jaw was taut with restraint. Because even if you win, you'll still crave me. The way I crave you. Clara's heart pounded violently, her body betraying her with the heat of his touch. But she caught his wrist, lowering it slowly, her eyes cold. Tomorrow, Adrian, I won't just take your empire. I'll take away the illusion that you ever owned me. She stepped back, leaving him in the dim light, his chest rising and falling with uneven breaths, his composure unraveling. For the first time, Adrian Cross looked less like the untouchable king of Hovendale and more like a man cornered, by his wife, his enemy, his obsession. The reckoning had begun. The boardroom of Cross Corporation had always been Adrian's throne room. Polished mahogany table, gleaming glass walls overlooking the city, portraits of former titans staring down with austere pride, every inch designed to remind those who entered of their insignificance. Yet on this morning, as shareholders filed in, the atmosphere felt different. There was a tension humming in the air, a silent anticipation that something monumental was about to happen. Clara walked in last, not as an invited guest but as a storm. She wore a fitted black dress, severe and elegant, her hair swept back to reveal the sharp lines of her jaw. Gasps and whispers rippled through the room. Adrian's estranged wife, the woman who had been the subject of every headline, was here to witness the vote. Adrian, already seated at the head of the table, turned his gaze toward her, dark and unreadable. He didn't stop her as she took a chair near Eleanor Grant, as though he was daring her to try. The meeting began, Adrian's voice calm, commanding, laying out his plan for the overseas expansion project. His words were sharp, practiced, but his eyes flicked to Clara again and again, as though her very presence unsettled him. When he finished, the room stirred with unease. Clara waited for the silence to deepen before rising slowly to her feet. "Impressive words, Adrian," she said, her voice cutting through the tension like glass. "But the board deserves the truth." She laid a folder on the table, sliding it toward the nearest shareholder. Documents spilled out, proof of neglected liabilities, reckless projections, and overseas partners already pulling out. This isn't vision. It's desperation. And if you approve this project, you're not investing in growth. You're investing in collapse. Murmurs erupted, papers shuffled, eyes darted between Clara and Adrian. Adrian rose to his feet in a blur, his hands braced on the table, his voice low and dangerous. "Enough. You don't speak here, Clara. You don't belong here." Clara met his blazing gaze, unflinching. "That's where you're wrong. I belong everywhere you thought I'd be invisible." The vote began. One by one, the shareholders cast their voices, not in favor of Adrian's plan, but against it. Eleanor's influence was clear, Victor Lane's smirk unmistakable, Thomas Grayson's satisfaction barely hidden. When the final tally was read, the project was dead. Adrian's plan had failed. His empire had bled. And Clara had delivered the wound. The room erupted with whispers, shareholders already moving to their next alliances, but Adrian's world narrowed to a single figure, Clara. She stood tall, her eyes gleaming, her lips curved faintly. Victory radiated from her, and it seared him more than defeat itself. He strode around the table in a storm, his hand seizing her arm, dragging her into the shadowed corridor outside before anyone could react. He slammed her against the wall, his breath ragged, his composure shattered. "You did this," he rasped. "You've turned them against me." Clara's chest rose and fell, her body trembling with adrenaline, but her smile was cold. "No, Adrian. You did this to yourself. I just showed them the truth." His hand pressed harder into her waist, his lips hovering at her ear, his voice raw. "I should hate you." His forehead dropped against hers, his restraint unraveling, his chest heaving. "But all I want is to have you, right here, right now." Clara's pulse raced, her body igniting at the dangerous proximity, but she whispered through clenched teeth, "Wanting me doesn't make you powerful. It makes you weak." And for the first time in his life, Adrian Cross realized weakness had never felt so consuming. Adrian didn't let Clara go right away. His hand was still clamped on her waist, his body pressed dangerously close, his jaw taut with restraint. The corridor outside the boardroom was silent except for their ragged breathing, the muffled hum of voices leaking through the door. He could crush her lips beneath his in an instant, erase the smug triumph in her eyes, but that was what she wanted, to prove he was nothing more than a man undone by obsession. Slowly, painfully, he released her, stepping back with fists clenched so tightly his knuckles whitened. Clara smoothed her dress with calm precision, her smirk infuriating in its serenity. "You see, Adrian," she murmured, "you taught me everything I needed to win. I just chose to use it against you." She turned to leave, but his voice followed, low and dangerous. "Don't mistake this for defeat. You've embarrassed me in front of them, but this empire doesn't crumble because of whispers. It crumbles when I say it does." Clara looked back over her shoulder, her eyes gleaming with challenge. "Then maybe it's time someone else gave the orders." She left him standing there, his chest heaving, his pride in tatters. The vote made waves across the city. Stock prices dipped, rival companies circled like vultures, and for the first time in years, Cross Corporation looked vulnerable. Adrian spent long hours in his office, smoke and whiskey clinging to his suit, his control slipping inch by inch. Bella tried to console him, plastering on her painted smile, but he shoved her away with cold disdain. "You're useless to me," he snapped, his voice a whip. Bella froze, her face pale, realizing that in Adrian's war with Clara, she had become irrelevant. Clara, meanwhile, moved like a queen through the city. Invitations poured in, luncheons, art showings, private gatherings of power brokers who once ignored her. She accepted each with calculated grace, building her network until it was no longer a network but a throne. Yet in her quiet moments, when the lights dimmed and the wine lost its taste, she admitted to herself the truth: Adrian's touch still haunted her. The way his voice had broken when he said he should hate her, the way his restraint trembled when he pinned her against the wall. She hated him, loathed him, but she couldn't silence the hunger he ignited in her blood. It came to a head one evening when Clara returned to her suite to find Adrian waiting inside, seated in the dark with a glass in hand. He rose when she entered, his gaze shadowed, his voice hoarse. "You've taken everything from me. The board. The press. The city. But you haven't taken me." He stalked toward her, his presence suffocating, his control unraveling. "Because no matter how high you rise, you still burn when I touch you." His hand cupped her jaw, tilting her face up, his thumb grazing her lips with maddening slowness. Clara's pulse roared, her body betraying her with a shiver, but her voice was cold as steel. "If I burn, Adrian, then I'll make sure you burn with me." His lips hovered a breath from hers, his chest heaving, his hunger raw. For a moment, the world narrowed to that single line between destruction and surrender. And though Clara pushed him back, her hands trembling, both of them knew the truth: neither was going to walk away unscathed. The final reckoning was no longer about empire or power. It was about which of them would survive the fire they had set ablaze. The night after Adrian confronted her in the suite, Clara couldn't sleep. The city lights bled through her curtains, a restless pulse that matched her own. She pressed her palms against the windowpane, her breath fogging the glass, replaying every word he'd said. "You still burn when I touch you." She hated how true it was, hated the heat that still lingered in her veins, the memory of his thumb on her lips. But she reminded herself of the boardroom, of Bella's smirk, of her parents' betrayal. Desire was a weakness she couldn't afford. She was too close to winning. The next morning, her allies gathered again: Eleanor, Victor, Thomas. They were sharper now, hungrier, emboldened by Clara's victories. "Adrian will retaliate," Victor warned, his eyes narrowed. "You've cornered him, but cornered men lash out. And Adrian Cross is more dangerous than most." Clara nodded, her voice calm but steely. "Let him. The more desperate he becomes, the clearer the cracks will show. We're not just dismantling his empire, we're dismantling his myth." Later that day, Clara received a summons. Adrian wanted her at the villa. Not through whispers, not through intrusion into her suite, this time it was formal, delivered in writing with his personal seal. The message was simple: "Come tonight. Alone." Clara considered refusing. But part of her knew the war could not be won in absentia. If Adrian was preparing his strike, she had to face him head-on. When she arrived that evening, the villa was silent, the air heavy with anticipation. Adrian waited in the grand hall, his suit immaculate, his expression unreadable. Bella was nowhere to be seen. "You came," he said simply, his voice low, carrying across the marble floor. Clara stepped forward, her heels clicking, her face a mask of calm. "You asked. I don't obey you, Adrian. I chose to face you." His lips curved faintly, though his eyes burned. "And yet here you are, walking into the lion's den." He circled her slowly, his presence suffocating, his gaze raking over her with the hunger of a man who had lost everything but obsession. "You've made me bleed," he said, his voice raw. "You've turned my allies against me, humiliated me before the city, stolen the board out from under me. And still, I can't destroy you. Because I'd rather burn with you than live without you." Clara's chest tightened, her pulse hammering, but she held her ground. "Then burn, Adrian. Burn for every choice you made. Burn for the wife you discarded, for the sister you flaunted, for the empire you thought was unshakable." She stepped closer, her voice dropping to a whisper, her eyes gleaming with steel. "And when you're nothing but ashes, I'll be the one standing." For a long moment, silence stretched between them, thick and suffocating. Adrian's hand twitched at his side, as though he wanted to seize her, crush her, kiss her until she surrendered. But he didn't move. His restraint was a war in itself. Clara turned and walked past him, her gown sweeping like a blade across marble, leaving him trembling in the shadows of his own home. Adrian Cross had built an empire that conquered the world, but in that moment, he realized his final reckoning had already begun. And it wore Clara's face. The morning after Clara left the villa, Hovendale woke to chaos. News outlets reported an anonymous leak exposing Cross Corporation's overseas failures in brutal detail. The documents were authentic, Thomas Grayson had made sure of that, and their release sent shockwaves through the market. Shares plummeted, investors panicked, and for the first time in years, Adrian Cross looked vulnerable not just socially but financially. Clara sat in her hotel suite with the paper spread across her lap, sipping her coffee as calmly as if she were reading the weather. Every headline was another wound, another reminder that Adrian's empire was no longer invincible. Bella, however, unraveled completely. She stormed into Adrian's study, her hair disheveled, her voice shrill. "It's her. Clara did this. She's tearing you apart piece by piece while you sit here and do nothing." Adrian looked up from his desk, his eyes bloodshot from sleeplessness, his jaw rigid. "Get out, Bella." She froze, her mouth opening and closing. "What?" His voice was like a whip. "Get out." When she didn't move, he slammed his hand down on the desk, the sound echoing like thunder. Bella fled, her sobs trailing down the hall. Adrian didn't chase her. He didn't care. His war was with Clara, and Clara alone. That evening, Clara hosted a private dinner for her allies in Eleanor Grant's penthouse. The city glittered beneath them, the wine flowed, and laughter filled the room. But Clara remained calm, poised, almost detached, as though she were already envisioning the endgame. Victor raised a toast. To Clara, the woman who took on Adrian Cross and won. The glasses clinked, but Clara only smiled faintly. "Not yet," she murmured. "Victory isn't when he falls. It's when he admits I was never beneath him." As if summoned by her words, Adrian appeared outside her hotel later that night. He didn't storm in this time. He waited in the shadows by the entrance, his suit immaculate, his eyes burning. When Clara stepped out, radiant in a velvet gown, their gazes collided like lightning. He approached slowly, deliberately, his presence overwhelming. "You've destroyed my company," he said hoarsely. "You've turned the city against me. And still I can't stop wanting you." His hand brushed her arm, his touch searing. "Tell me, Clara. Does victory taste as sweet when your body still craves me?" Her heart thundered, her body trembling at the heat of his words, but her voice was steady. "It's not craving, Adrian. It's remembering. And I remember enough to know I'll never kneel again." She stepped past him, her perfume lingering, her heels striking against the pavement like a war drum. Adrian turned, his chest heaving, his restraint fracturing. "One day," he called after her, his voice ragged, "you'll admit you still belong to me." Clara paused, glancing back over her shoulder, her eyes sharp as glass. "No, Adrian. One day you'll admit you've always belonged to me." And with that, she disappeared into the night, leaving Adrian standing in the dark, consumed by the fire he could neither extinguish nor survive. The reckoning was no longer near. It was here. The fallout from the leaked reports shook Cross Corporation to its core. Analysts dissected Adrian's every misstep on television, rival companies circled with shark-like precision, and shareholders whispered about restructuring. Some even spoke Clara's name aloud, not with mockery but with reverence. "She saw what Adrian didn't, she's the one who warned us." For the first time, Adrian's empire trembled under the weight of a woman he had once discarded. Clara watched it all unfold with calculated calm. She spent her mornings at Eleanor's penthouse, reviewing documents with Victor and Thomas, her afternoons attending luncheons where the city's elite courted her attention, her evenings making appearances that set tongues wagging. Every movement was deliberate. Every smile, every gown, every word crafted to cement her as Hovendale's new center of gravity. Yet in her quiet moments, alone in her suite, she pressed her hands against her lips, remembering the way Adrian's mouth had crashed onto hers, the way her body had betrayed her by trembling against him. Desire was a weakness she hated, and one she couldn't entirely silence. Adrian, meanwhile, descended further into obsession. His board scolded him, investors demanded answers, and Bella, once his public shield, was little more than a ghost, banished to the periphery. But none of it mattered. Clara consumed him. He saw her in every headline, heard her name in every meeting, felt her presence even in the silence of his empty bedroom. His pride told him to crush her. His hunger told him to surrender. The war inside him left him raw, dangerous, unpredictable. It came to a head at a society banquet hosted by the mayor. Clara arrived draped in a gown of molten gold, the chandeliers reflecting off her like fire incarnate. The room gasped, cameras flashing, whispers erupting. Adrian was already there, his presence dark, commanding, his gaze locking onto her the instant she entered. Bella trailed at his side, her smile brittle, but no one looked at her. All eyes were on Clara. As the night wore on, Clara worked the room with effortless charm, her laughter light, her poise immaculate. Adrian's jaw tightened with every glance, every smile she bestowed on another man. At last, he could bear it no longer. He cornered her on the balcony, the city sprawling beneath them, his hand slamming against the rail beside her. "Do you enjoy this?" he rasped, his voice hoarse, his eyes blazing. "Parading yourself in front of me, making me want you until I can't think straight?" Clara tilted her head, her lips curving faintly. "Immensely." In a blur, he seized her, pulling her flush against his chest, his mouth hovering a breath from hers. "I should end this war," he growled. "And you?" His hand slid to her waist, gripping her with desperate possession. "But all I want is to take you here, now, until you admit you still belong to me." Clara's pulse thundered, her body igniting with traitorous heat, but her voice cut like steel. "No, Adrian. You're the one who belongs to me. And the more you fight it, the deeper you sink." She shoved him back, her golden gown swirling as she swept inside, leaving him trembling against the balcony rail, his control shattered. Behind her, the whispers grew louder. Clara hadn't just stolen the spotlight, she had stolen the Empire's crown. And Adrian Cross, the man who once ruled Hovendale, now stood on the edge of ruin, undone by the very woman he had sworn to forget. By dawn, every gossip column in Hovendale carried the same photo, Clara in her molten gold gown, walking back into the banquet hall with her head high, while Adrian stood on the balcony behind her, fists clenched, face shadowed by defeat. The narrative had flipped completely. Once, she had been his forgotten wife. Now, he was her shadow. Investors began calling Clara directly, bypassing Adrian altogether. Her name entered boardrooms as a serious contender, not just for influence but for control. And Clara, sipping her morning coffee, accepted every call with calm precision. Bella, on the other hand, was unraveling beyond repair. She confronted Adrian in the villa's grand hall, her voice hoarse from crying, her makeup smeared. "You're letting her destroy you," she screamed. "You promised me she was nothing. That I was the one." Adrian looked at her coldly, his voice flat. "You were never the one, Bella. You were a placeholder too." The words shattered her more than any slap could have. She collapsed to the marble floor, sobbing, while Adrian walked past her without a glance. His war was no longer with Clara's sister. It was with Clara herself, and with the man he saw in the mirror. Clara's next move was bolder. She arranged a press interview, her first ever, broadcast live across the city. Dressed in an ivory suit that radiated authority, she sat beneath the hot lights and answered every question with poise. She spoke of resilience, of betrayal, of a woman who refused to be silenced. Without naming Adrian directly, she dismantled his image piece by piece. "Power without accountability isn't strength," she told the interviewer, her gaze steady on the camera. "It's arrogance. And arrogance always collapses." Adrian watched from his office, every word a blade in his chest. He wanted to storm into the studio, drag her out, silence her with his hands and his mouth. But he couldn't. Because she was right, and because his obsession had turned him into the very weakness she accused him of being. That night, he went to her again. Not the hotel, not Eleanor's penthouse. He found her at a private club, seated at the bar with a glass of champagne, her allies scattered around the room. He didn't care about them. He only saw her. He strode across the room, seized her hand, and pulled her into the shadows of a side corridor. His grip was iron, his breath ragged, his eyes blazing. Enough, he rasped. You've made me bleed in front of them all. You've taken my board, my company, my city. But you haven't taken me. He pressed her against the wall, his chest crushing hers, his lips hovering a hair's breadth from her mouth. Admit it, Clara, he growled, his voice breaking. Admit you still want me. Clara's pulse thundered, her body trembling with the fire of his nearness, but her smile was cold, sharp as glass. Wanting you isn't the same as belonging to you. And you belonged to me from the moment you couldn't let me go. Adrian's restraint snapped. His mouth crashed onto hers, fierce and bruising, a kiss of war and surrender. For a moment, Clara let herself drown, her hands clutching his shirt, her body burning against him. But when she pulled back, breathless, she whispered against his lips, "This is your reckoning, Adrian. And it's only the beginning." He froze, torn between desire and despair, while she walked back into the light of the club, leaving him in the dark, shaking like a man who had finally realized he was already defeated. The kiss in the club haunted both of them. Clara returned to her suite trembling with fury at herself for surrendering even for a heartbeat, her lips swollen, her body still aching with his heat. She stripped off her gown, stood before the mirror, and whispered like a vow, "Never again. I won't let him own even a piece of me." Yet even as she said it, the taste of him lingered. She clenched her fists until her nails bit her palms. This wasn't desire, it was poison. And she would use it to kill the part of her that still ached for him. Adrian didn't leave the club immediately. He stood in the corridor, chest heaving, his mind a storm of rage and hunger. He had kissed her as if claiming her, but the words she whispered before walking away echoed louder than his own heartbeat. "This is your reckoning." For the first time, Adrian Cross, the man who had commanded cities and crushed rivals, knew what it felt like to be powerless. Not against the board. Not against enemies. But against her. The city, however, was no longer blind. Reporters openly questioned Clara's influence on Cross Corporation, analysts speculated about her next move, and shareholders whispered her name with reverence. Clara fanned the flames without mercy. She hosted another gala, this time not for charity but for power, her guest list carefully chosen. Judges, investors, politicians, anyone whose loyalty could tip the scales. She entered in a gown of scarlet silk, her hair swept high, a diamond at her throat. The chandeliers glittered, the crowd gasped, and Clara owned the room before she spoke a single word. Adrian arrived late, his entrance like thunder. He wore black, severe and regal, his presence commanding silence. But this time, the whispers weren't about his power. They were about his downfall. He saw Clara at the center of the hall, radiant, untouchable, surrounded by people who once bowed to him. His jaw tightened, his fists clenched, but when he met her gaze, the fire there nearly brought him to his knees. They crossed paths near the grand staircase, the crowd parting instinctively. "Enjoying your throne?" Adrian murmured, his voice low, dangerous. Clara tilted her head, her lips curving faintly. "It suits me better than it ever suited you." His eyes darkened, his hand twitching as though he wanted to seize her then and there, drag her into the shadows and remind her she was still his. But he held back, his restraint hanging by a thread. Later, when the gala quieted and the music softened, Adrian cornered her in a side room lit only by candlelight. He shut the door, the latch clicking like a trap. "Tell me, Clara," he rasped, stepping closer, his chest rising and falling with ragged breaths. "When you stand in their spotlight, when they bow to you, does it silence the way you tremble when I touch you?" Clara's pulse thundered, her body betraying her with heat, but she lifted her chin, her voice calm and cruel. No, Adrian. It fuels it. Because every time I tremble, I remember how weak you are for me. His eyes blazed, his control snapped, and in an instant he had her pinned against the wall, his mouth devouring hers in a kiss of fury and desperation. She let him, for a breath, for a heartbeat, then tore free, her lips swollen, her eyes sharp as glass. You can't win, Adrian. Not in the boardroom, not in this war, not even in this. She swept past him, her scarlet gown trailing like fire, leaving him in the dark with his chest heaving, his hands trembling. And Adrian, the man who had once been untouchable, realized with bone-deep certainty, Clara hadn't just become his reckoning. She had become his master. The night of the Scarlet Gala marked a turning point. No longer was Clara just Adrian's estranged wife clawing her way into relevance, she was the center of Hovendale's storm. Newspapers dubbed her the phoenix of the Cross dynasty, investors called her the future, and whispers spread that she could soon replace Adrian entirely. Clara accepted every headline with a calm smile, but behind her eyes was steel. This was the moment she had bled for, the moment she had burned for. And she would not falter now. Adrian, however, was unraveling. His board convened an emergency session to address the company's spiraling reputation, and several members openly questioned his leadership. Bella tried to smooth things over, her voice sugary, her hand on Adrian's arm, but he shook her off with brutal coldness. You're finished here, he said flatly, loud enough for the room to hear. Bella froze, the humiliation worse than any slap. She fled in tears, and not a single person followed. For the first time, Adrian Cross stood alone in his empire, abandoned not by his enemies, but by those who once clung to his power. Clara struck her final blow the next evening. She hosted a press conference at the Grand Pavilion, the same hall where Adrian had once announced expansions and triumphs. She took the stage in a tailored black suit, her presence radiating command. Power is not measured by how many bow to you, she told the room, her voice steady, her gaze unwavering. It is measured by whether you can stand when the world demands answers. Cross Corporation failed because arrogance replaced accountability. That era ends now. The crowd erupted with applause, cameras flashing, her words replayed live across the city. Adrian watched from the back of the hall, unseen, his eyes burning as he listened. Every sentence was another dagger, every cheer another reminder that Clara had not just risen, she had dethroned him. Yet he couldn't walk away. When the conference ended and Clara stepped down from the stage, Adrian intercepted her in the corridor, his presence suffocating, his voice raw. You've taken everything from me, he rasped. My board. My company. My city. Tell me, Clara, was destroying me enough? Clara looked up at him, her eyes sharp, her lips curved in a cold smile. It was never about destroying you, Adrian. It was about proving I was never beneath you. She stepped closer, her voice dropping to a whisper that seared his skin. And now the world knows it too. His hand shot out, gripping her wrist, dragging her flesh against his chest. His breath was hot, his eyes wild, his control gone. You've ruined me, he growled, his mouth hovering a breath from hers. And I've never wanted you more. Clara's pulse roared, her body betraying her with a shiver, but she forced her voice steady. Then you'll want me as you fall. And I'll be the one watching. She pulled free, her heels striking against the marble as she walked away, her shadow long in the golden light of the hall. Adrian remained frozen, trembling like a man stripped bare. For the first time in his life, Adrian Cross was not feared, not revered, he was obsessed, undone, conquered. And Clara was the one who held the crown. The city of Hovendale woke to a new reality. Stock tickers blazed red as Cross Corporation's value collapsed, headlines screamed about Adrian's failure, and whispers turned into certainties, he was finished. Meanwhile, Clara was hailed as the woman who had dismantled the untouchable king. She was invited to panels, courted by foreign investors, and treated like the new face of power. What began as whispers of scandal had become a full coronation. Clara, once the invisible wife, now reigned in plain sight. But Adrian wasn't gone. Not yet. He spent his final night in the villa like a lion pacing its cage, whiskey in hand, his empire crumbling around him. Bella had disappeared, her calls unanswered, her name already erased from society columns. The board no longer respected him, investors no longer feared him. And yet, through the wreckage, one thought consumed him: Clara. He couldn't destroy her, couldn't silence her, couldn't stop wanting her until it hollowed him out. His downfall wasn't the board, or the markets, or the shareholders, it was her. Clara returned to the villa one last time, not summoned, not coerced, but by choice. She walked through the marble halls she had once tiptoed through as a dutiful wife, her heels striking like war drums. Adrian stood at the far end of the grand hall, his tie undone, his shirt open at the collar, his eyes dark and hollow. He didn't move when she entered, didn't speak until she was close enough to hear the raggedness in his breath. "You won," he said simply, his voice hoarse. "You took everything from me." Clara stopped in front of him, her gaze steady, her poise unshaken. "No, Adrian. I took back what you never valued. Myself." She turned as if to leave, but his hand shot out, seizing her wrist, pulling her back against his chest. His breath was hot against her ear, his voice breaking. "Even now, when I've lost it all, I still want you. Does that make me pathetic?" Her heart thundered, her body aching with the same fire that had cursed her since the beginning, but she whispered coldly, "Yes. Because wanting me has become your ruin." His grip trembled, his forehead pressing to hers, his lips hovering a breath away. "Then ruin me again," he rasped. For one fleeting moment, Clara let herself feel it, the heat of him, the hunger, the war they had waged through kisses and claws. She kissed him once, hard and final, tasting the ashes of what they had been. Then she pulled back, her lips swollen, her eyes sharp as steel. "Goodbye, Adrian." She walked away, her scarlet gown sweeping behind her like fire, leaving him standing broken in the ruins of his empire. Adrian sank to his knees on the marble floor, his fists clenched, his breath ragged, his pride in shards. And as the doors closed behind her, Clara knew the war was over. The reckoning was complete. She had risen from the ashes not as Adrian's wife, not as his shadow, but as the woman who destroyed the man who once thought he owned her. The crown was hers now, and Adrian Cross was nothing but a fallen king consumed by the fire he could never extinguish.